There are some quotes from history that are just iconic. Everybody knows them. But what if one of the most famous last words ever spoken isn't what we think it is at all? Today, we're going to dig into a famous cry from the cross to uncover a hidden meaning that honestly might just change everything you thought you knew about it. Okay, so let's set the scene. It's one of the most dramatic moments in all of history. Hours of agony have passed. A strange darkness has fallen over the land. And then a single voice cuts through the silence. It's a moment just packed with tension and a sense of finality. These are the words, spoken in Aramaic. For centuries, right, they've been seen as the ultimate cry of a man pushed beyond his breaking point. But here's the question. What did they really mean to the people who were actually there, hearing them with their own ears? When you translate it directly into English, you get, my God, why have you forsaken me?" And to our modern ears, man, that sounds like pure despair. It sounds like a question that comes from a place of total abandonment, that final moment of doubt when it feels like even God has walked away. So the common understanding is pretty clear. It's a moment of failure, of being completely and utterly alone. But here's our first clue that something else is going on. Even the crowd at the time was confused. Some of them thought he was calling out for the prophet Elijah. That little bit of confusion tells us there's probably more to this story. And that brings us to the absolute key to unlocking this whole thing. What if the first century audience, or at least, the ones who were really listening, heard something totally different? What if this wasn't a question at all, but an instruction? To get this, we have to kind of step back into their world. See, in ancient Jewish culture, scripture wasn't broken down into chapters and verses like we have in our Bibles today. Important texts, especially the Psalms, were known by heart. And if you wanted to refer to a whole psalm, you didn't say, hey, turn to Psalm 22. You just quoted the very first line. It was like a verbal hyperlink. We actually do something pretty similar today. If I start saying, Our Father, which art in heaven, your brain doesn't just stop there, does it? Nope. It immediately starts filling in the rest of the Lord's Prayer. That first phrase is a trigger for the whole text, and that is exactly the technique that was being used from the cross. So once you have that piece of cultural context, the entire scene just flips on its head. Jesus wasn't voicing his own feeling of being abandoned. He was deliberately pointing the whole crowd, the priests, the scribes, everyone watching, to a very specific scripture that they all knew inside and out. He was basically saying, pay attention, look here, this is what's happening. So what text was he pointing to? He was pointing them to Psalm 22. This is a psalm written by King David that contains an absolutely jaw-dropping, detailed prophecy of the exact suffering Jesus was going through. He was telling them in real time that they were watching a script written 1,000 years earlier. I mean, let that sink in for a second. Psalm 22 was written about 1,000 years before this event. That's centuries before the Persians or the Romans would even invent crucifixion as a punishment. So how could the writer have possibly known? The text describes it with chilling accuracy. Okay, this is really the core of it all. Let's just look at these direct parallels. Psalm 22 predicts that people will wag the head to mock him. The Gospel says they reviled him, wagging their heads. The Psalm quotes the mockers. The Gospel records them saying almost the exact same thing. And then, the really incredible parts. The Psalm says they pierced my hands and my feet, literally describing crucifixion, and that they would cast lots for my clothing, which is a very specific detail the soldiers carried out. The implication here is just staggering. By quoting that first line, Jesus was shouting to the crowd, "Don't you get it? What's happening to me right now isn't a tragedy. It's not a mistake. This is the fulfillment of Scripture. You are watching prophecy come to life." So, you see how this just shifts our entire understanding, right? That cry is transformed from a question of despair into this powerful, profound declaration of purpose. It's the key that unlocks the meaning of the whole event. By quoting Psalm 22, he was making all these deep statements at once. He was identifying himself as the person this ancient prophecy was all about. He was challenging the religious leaders right there to see what was happening right in front of their eyes. And he was confirming that his suffering was part of a divine plan, not some terrible accident. Not to be fair, this psalm does start with these intense descriptions of suffering. It talks about bones being out of joint, a heart melting like wax, being brought to the dust of death. So you can totally see why, if you only heard that first line, you'd think it was all about despair. But, and this is the whole point, he was quoting the entire psalm, and this is how that very same psalm ends. all the ends of the world shall remember and turn unto the Lord. It moves from terrible suffering to this incredible declaration of cosmic, global victory. And that's really the ultimate takeaway here. By pointing everyone to this text, Jesus wasn't fixated on the pain of the moment. He was pointing through the suffering to the ultimate triumph it was all about to achieve. He was declaring victory right in the middle of what looked like total and complete defeat. So, what does this all mean for us? Well, understanding this cultural context, this idea of the psalm hyperlink, it completely flips the narrative on its head. Suddenly, those famous last words are no longer the cry of a defeated man wondering where God went. Instead, they become the confident, deliberate statement of a king, declaring that everything is going exactly according to a 1,000-year-old plan. It's a statement of control, of knowledge, and of ultimate purpose. So it leaves us with this really fascinating question to think about. This isn't just some small theological detail. It reframes one of the most central moments in human history. It suggests that what we've always seen as a moment of ultimate weakness was actually intended to be a demonstration of ultimate prophetic power.